If attachment is bad, then non-attachment is good, right? It must be true. But what if it's not either I'm attached or I'm not attached? What if there's a range of things in the middle? Then it's not about good or bad. It's about equanimity. Oh, and by the way, what if the key driver to attachment is greed? Hi, it's Margaret Meloni, and welcome to Season 3 of the Death Dhamma podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so appreciative that you are part of my community. And yet, I seek not to be attached to the idea of the podcast or even to the idea of our community. And that's our topic this season: attachment, clinging, and aversion. What happens when we really want something? What happens when we really don't want something? And what does it do to our suffering and dissatisfaction? Let's dive in and find out a little bit more with today's episode. Attachment is not the same as non-attachment or detachment. It's actually closer to the Pali word loba, which translates to greed. So in this discussion, Dave Smith explains how greed can lead us to unethical and unskillful actions, right? If we're trying to acquire more of something or not experience something, will that take us down a path of sacrificing our own values and our morals for that acquisition or to avoid something? That's what's really leading to our suffering. So we have a discussion on greed and attachment and how we can become aware of the places in which that's surfacing for us in our lives every day, because that might be encouraging us, I'll say, to put aside our true values and who we want to be. And by the way, we're just human, so a healthy meta practice is going to help us as we look at greed and consider the true source of our suffering. Everyone, welcome. I'm so happy today to bring back Dave Smith of Dave Smith Dharma. And if you were with me in season 1, you heard Dave do some really open, honest, deep sharing about going through the process of death and grief and how it has impacted him in his life. And he's come back today to share with us about attachment. And I know that he's going to also share in a similar way deep thoughts and helpful things for us. But what I want to do first is let Dave give an intro to you to tell you more in depth of what he's doing, which is all good things. And so Dave, thanks so much. And I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Yeah, my name is Dave Smith. I live here in rural Colorado. In fact, the easiest way is if anybody wants to connect with me or find out more about what I do, they can simply go to my website, which is davesmithdharma.com. And we just redid a website. It's very self-explanatory. There's not a lot of stuff in there. I do have a mentoring program. I work with people one-on-one. I do residential retreats around the country. And also we have a program called the Secular Dharma Foundation, which is ready to start doing a lot of stuff. So if you go to my website and get on my email list, that's probably the best thing to do. I don't send out a lot of emails, probably 8 or 10 a year. And also my podcast, I have a podcast and stuff, but that's all on my website. And if folks want to dig further, it's easy to find out the different things that I do. So
thank you so much. Now, I feel very confident that you have thoughts around our topic for this season, which is attachment. And I bet you have stories and things to share with us. So I think that's all I need to say right now. And then let's hear what you have to say.
Well, attachment's an interesting word. First of all, I feel very attached to very many things.
Ah, okay.
I think that it's easy to, attachment gets a bit of a bad reputation. And we can suffer a lot around things. We're attached to things and we lose the things we're attached to. And I think it's part of the deal, right? So I think one of the first things that I would say is to be careful that we don't think that we want to be non-attached or detached.
Oh, now I appreciate that, because I will say when I was a new Buddhist, I was confused. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of us, we go down that path of like, okay, so I shouldn't care for anything. I shouldn't want anything.
Right. And that's not good.
Right.
So, but one can easily get that message. You're like, well, attachment's bad, so being not attached is good, right? Like, yeah. But we know black and white thinking is never a good move. So part of it is, trying to understand that it's not black. It's not either I'm attached or I'm not attached. There's probably a range of things in the middle. And
Mm-hmm.
so, when we're non-attached or we're detached, which I think would probably be the most pejorative way to say it, to be
Mm-hmm.
detached, is we're getting into the near enemy of equanimity, which is, indifference or apathy or cynicism, the kind
Mm-hmm.
of like a kind of a coldness where
Right.
where we feel like, well, if you follow the logic, it makes sense. Well, I realize that when I attach to things and I cling to things and I hold on to things, and those things either fall away or they die or they're no longer, then I get burned. I feel pain. I feel loss. So then we'd say, well, then one would just think, well, just don't do that.
Right. And that's not really
It,
the answer, is it? Like, I know I've
no.
had friends, not even in the Buddhist world. I can think of a couple of people I know that like they got to a certain point in life because, life can be challenging and we have loss. And I would know a couple of people that kind of lived with like, I'm going to go home, close the door, and I'm not going to really engage because if I engage with anyone, eventually they'll be gone and it's going to hurt.
And I did that with romantic relationships for probably a good decade, and I don't recommend that because
Mm-hmm.
it does. On some level, it makes sense. It's like, okay, well, if I do this and it gets hurt and it causes me pain, I just don't do that and I'll be fine. But then we end up in that non-attached, detached, where we end up feeling lonely and we feel sad and we feel apathetic and we feel disengaged.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the way that I would think about it is, we we do want to be non-attached. I can see how non-attached, we can make a claim for that being a good strategy, but we also want to be engaged at the same time, so it's not non-engagement with life.
Okay.
So I think that, and also if you want to get be nerdy about the language, the word attachment uh, really comes from the Pali word loba, which
Mm-hmm.
really which the translation is greed. So it's really greed that the Buddha is talking about as the problem. But somehow greed got turned into attachment. Now, if you look at the
Mm-hmm.
work of John Bowlby and attachment theory and that stuff, a lot of clinical training now is saying actually it's really important to have healthy attachment. Like, so now that's a word. But
Yes.
what so I think that we want to get a little bit away from the word attachment in general as being derogatory and step back into the where it
Mm-hmm.
came from, this word loba, which means greed. Now, greed and attachment I wouldn't call them synonyms in English, but
Mm-hmm.
greed is that, and we can get attached to greed, but greed is really a quality of mind,
Mm-hmm.
that's a I need this to be happy kind of thinking.
Ah.
I won't be happy unless, or I need. It's more of a clinging and kind of a fueling and more of a grasping. And of course, if we grab hard enough, we can say we're attached. But I think trying to find better language than the word attachment might be
Mhm.
a more sophisticated way to think about it, because um, most people would not. It's easy to plead a case to say, well, attachment's not totally terrible, right? There's some ways that
Right.
attachment's good, but no one's going to really stick up for greed, except for that movie with Michael Douglas from the '80s where he talks
Oh
about
my
greed.
gosh, right? Where he's like,
Yeah.
greed is good. And it's like, no.
Yeah. That's the only time you ever see that. So I think we're talking about the mental quality of greed, which is kind of a ferocity, a self-centeredness, a needness, and also, and if we get into ethics, I think also plays into the conversation. Is the
Mm-hmm.
problem with greed is if I want something bad enough, I will do things that are unskillful. I will do things that are unethical. I will do things that go against my own values and morals to acquire whatever it is that I'm after. So,
Oh, now see,
so
that makes sense because it's then I feel like it's that such strong wanting, that greed. I have to have this. I have to have this many, whatever, this much money or this much food. And then it becomes, if do you become, I'll say, merciless in your quest? And then what behavior does that lead me towards if I have to have that many sacks of flour in the pantry or something?
that's right. So it becomes actually more. I think when we look at it from if we go back to the original source of the word greed, then I think we're talking about ethics, or we're talking
Okay.
about sila, where now we're not getting into a philosophical, perspective around whether attachment is good or bad or right or
Mm-hmm.
wrong, but we're getting into the reality that greediness is unethical and unskillful, and causes a lot of harm for ourselves and other people. And so that idea that I'm going to, and I can be attached to the things that I'm greedy for, of course, but I
Sure.
think it's that it's at what point does greed become so predominant in my psychological experience that I'm willing to sacrifice my own morals and my own values to acquire the things that I want so badly? And I think that that's when we really, from a practical point of view, we can really probably give examples of areas in which we're doing that. And I think that that's a really efficient place to be working on in your practice. Okay, like, where am I sacrificing my values and my morality and my ethics to get the things that I want?
Oh, I see. Okay. So I'm kind of perceiving this where it's the really wanting something so intensely that I might change something I believe in order to get it. And I might cross a line. For example, I have an example I'm going to be careful introducing. I will say a family member recently asked for help with something, and I agreed to help. And then it turned out that the request was a false request because this person was gathering up something else.
Yeah, so there's probably some greed involved there.
Yes, yes.
Now, whether there was attachment involved, we could probably sort that out. But I think greed is the thing that's a lot easier to acknowledge. Like, for a perfectly good example, like infidelity is a great example of greed. You're in a committed monogamous relationship, and the greed for the sexual desire becomes so strong that you're willing to sacrifice the commitment you made to the other person for this other experience. So we're dealing with this all the time. And also, too, we don't want to get into this whole debate of greed being bad or wrong either. It's just unskillful, right? And it doesn't lead to happiness or contentment for yourself or other people. I mean, if you look at people in our culture who are financially successful, or people, celebrity people, financial people, are they happy? Probably many of them are not. Greed is not something that it's very hot. So when the Buddha talks about the three fires, some schools of Buddhism call them the three poisons. But if you go back further into the canon, the Buddha talks about essentially our problem, human beings, is that we are consumed and corrupted by the fires of greed, hatred, and confusion. And so when we and they don't lead to contentment. They're fires. They're burning. They're all second noble truth territory. They're craving. Their reactivity. Their aversion. Their hatred. They're the aspects of our psychological emotional experience we're actually trying to liberate ourselves from. That's the whole Buddhist endeavor right there.
Yes.
And so greed is one of them.
Yeah.
And so we want to be very careful about how we practice with it and how we approach it, because what we want to be is we want to be content, we want to be cool, we want to be nibbana, nirvana, and that what nirvana actually means is gone out.
Yes, I was thinking that as you were saying that, I like the expression of the three fires, because nibbana is also the extinguishing of the flame, right?
Exactly.
And so if I extinguish those flames, and if we go back to, I believe we go back to the point, which is to be released from suffering, like the Buddha said, I teach only the release from suffering. Then if we go back to, if I'm releasing the suffering and I want to reach nibbana, which is the extinguishing, then I need to put out these three flames.
That's right. Now, the interesting thing, if you look at the history, where the Buddha, the term that he uses for this is upadana, which means to cling. Clinging and grasping comes from this Pali word upadana, which means more than just that. And so in the Vedic tradition, in the Upanishads, they had these sacrificial fires, which were called upadanas.
Okay.
And so what the Buddha says is that you want these fires to go out, the fires of greed, hatred, and confusion to go out. But upadana has a double meaning. It means to cling and to grasp, but it also means to fuel. So in what ways are we clinging and grasping and being greedy? But in what ways are we throwing gasoline, or are we stoking our own fires of greed, hatred, or confusion, or greed in this sense, right? So how do we, so we can be clear about, like, what are things, maybe like doom scrolling on the internet is stoking fires, or looking at shit to buy on Amazon is still, so there's a lot of things that we do that fuel it. And so if you want to be happy and you want to be content and you want to be liberated in this world, you want your fires to go out. So you need to stop putting gas and logs on the fires, which is a really easy concept. Like no one's going to have I mean, my 10-year-old kid could understand this. This is not this whole idea of having a fire and putting the fire out, which is why I think the Buddha uses these metaphors, is they're very basic.
Yes.
You know, they're not esoteric, they're not mystical, they're very practical that way.
I've always felt like in his teaching that he was trying to make it as accessible as possible, you know, which is kind of what you're saying.
I think so.
And because, so it's, you know, you and I are talking, it's not the concept that's hard to grasp. It's the doing, right? And so like, I feel like he knew, like he sat under that tree and he's like, yeah. And that's why, you know, originally he was not going to teach. He's like, yeah, they're not going to be able to do this.
That's exactly right. He's like, no one's going to do this.
Because it's the doing. It's not the understanding. Like, you know, like I know logically if I'm trying to cut back on sugar, but I make a batch of cookies, like I get that was not the skillful choice.
I think I did that yesterday. You know, like, literally. And so it also too, it's a tough call because greed carries with it a lot of delusion. So we think that, well, if I get this, I'll be happy.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
You know, and so I want to be happy.
Right.
And so it's not an easy give up because greed is always convincing you. The story of greed is that it's promising you something that it will never actually provide.
Snake oil salesman. That's greed.
It's totally snake oil, right? So,
yes.
but you know, so, you know, it's easy to sit here and say all these things because we both are familiar with the teachings, but in actual life you know, so then we become, well, what is a good antidote? Well, a good antidote for greed, of course, is generosity.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, one of the easiest ways to cool down the fires of greed is to practice generosity, which is not something that comes easy to a lot of people.
True. So let's talk about this. Let's go. I'm going to ask a question. Let's see about this. So you do all these great mentoring and retreats and things. And so you see all of us in our different behavior and yourself and your family. And so somebody comes to you and how would you help get me started? How would you help me get started? Because like, this is the truth of suffering here. And so you see me, I come to you, you know, and how do you get me started?
Well, it depends. It depends on what's going on. You know, everybody's actually a bit different. So part of it, usually what I try to tell people right out of the gate is what I don't promise or what this is not, it's quick fix. There's no quick fix solution in my world.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times people, you know, they're looking for the fast, easy, quick shortcut. So part of it is understanding that the Dharma path is a long, slow path.
Okay.
And so that puts you right. So what level of greed do people have around like, you know, I want to meditate and I want to do Buddhism and there can be almost even a greed built into why we want to practice. I want to get something. What am I going to get out of this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's like, so I think part of it is trying to usually start with the triage of like, what are the things that are, you know, in your day-to-day life? What are some things that are going on for you that you find to be most challenging at the moment? And let's start with that.
Okay. So we start with our days, you know, like just what is the thing that's bringing you challenges where you can see your suffering in your day. Okay.
And there's probably some degree of greed, hatred, or confusion. Like, and sometimes the Buddha breaks them up into personality types. Like there's the greedy person, like the person who walks into a room. Someone walks into your house and they notice all the things in your house that they like. They're like, oh, I like that painting and I like the way she rearranged her thing. That's sort of the greed person. Okay. Then there's the person who walks in the house and notices all the things that they don't like. Right.
Yeah.
And then there's the person who walks in and doesn't even know what the hell's going on. You know what I mean? It's like totally oblivious to the whole thing. So part of it can be helpful to just see, like I would say probably I tend to be more on the aversive side of things. Like I'm pretty clear about what I don't want.
I
look at a menu. The first thing I do is rule out all the food I don't want to eat.
That's a good analogy. Thank you. That is a super good analogy. So the menu.
I'm like, I don't want that. I don't want a salad. I don't want that, you know.
I might be that way too. So as we were talking about the walking into the house, you know, I was like trying to picture, you know, because selfishly I was trying to picture myself in the scenario, right? And I was like, I know I've done all three of those things. Like I walked in and went, oh, I would never have that carpeting. But I know I've also walked in and went, oh, I want to go home and do that, you know? Yeah. And so I know which one am I now? I might be more the aversion because I think I have been all three.
Oh, we are all three, but the theory is, and I don't know if how true it is, but I
Mm-hmm.
think we all have a tendency towards one,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they all have benefits too. Like the person who's greedy tends to have more confidence.
Okay.
The person who has wisdom, the person who's aversive tends to have more wisdom, and the
Mhm.
person who's delusional or confused has more equanimity because they don't even notice what's going on for the most part. So
Right.
part of it is to just see like psychologically, like so in a very basic sense, it's like is your distress during the day ruled by wanting things and dealing with the dissatisfaction of not getting the things that you want? Is that something
Mm-hmm.
that's really bothering you? Or is there a lot of stuff going on in your life that you're not wanting, that you're trying to get rid of? Of course, we're doing both, craving and aversion, but um, it's good to have a good sense of kind of a bit how you might be wired, because then we can start to drill down on challenging some of the beliefs. Like, okay, I believe if I get this, do you really believe that if you get a new car, you're going to be happy? Like, do you really believe that that's true? And usually you walk people through, they go, no, I actually don't really believe that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, then don't act as if you don't believe it. And so that's the problem too, is we get tricked by these. Like, I believe if I can get this and get rid of that, then I'll be happy. And that's our whole strategy for life, is we want to get the things that we want. We want to avoid the things that we don't want, which of course is fine. But these behaviors get extreme, and they get to the point where they actually start to cause us suffering, and they start to cause problems that we're not even detecting.
Yeah, some striving, and then we just get on like this merry-go-round or like this
You get on
treadmill.
the hedonic treadmill, exactly.
Yeah, the treadmill. Okay, so I believe you. So you're teaching me like this doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take time, patience. I got to have some patience.
Yes, sir.
I need to develop an understanding of where am I experiencing the most suffering. You didn't say it that way, but where am I consistently having the most suffering day to day? And then maybe I pinpoint something, and I don't know, do I pinpoint like the suffering thing is the wanting the cookie, or is it more about the fact that the suffering translates to perhaps viewing things from a perspective of greed? Where would you take me next?
It's probably both, actually.
Okay. Okay.
And then the other side of the coin, I think, would be, because I think that, and I know you and I have talked about this before, Buddhism does get a bad reputation because of its predominant acknowledgement of suffering. But that's
Yes.
only half the story. So part of the work at the beginning is to notice areas in your life where you are doing well, and to
Ah.
notice areas in life where there is nibbana, where there is a sense of coolness, there's a sense of acceptance, there's a sense of ease. Because a lot of times people are having that happen a lot, but they're not noticing it. There's no mind. This is why mindfulness is so key.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a lot of times when we are feeling cool, we're feeling easeful, we're feeling present, we're feeling like there's no problem to solve in this particular moment, we don't necessarily acknowledge or notice that that's happening. So part of it, my encouragement, is to try to cultivate awareness of like noticing when you're not hurting, or you're not in suffering, or you're not in, notice. Do you notice moments where you feel okay? And people mostly say, no, I don't notice those moments, because those are the moments when I pick up my phone or I become distracted. As they say, we don't stop and smell the roses.
Ah, right. And so how do you teach me to do that, to notice those moments? Because otherwise they're going to go by.
Yeah, your fires have gone out. You're
Yeah.
noticing moments where you don't want anything, or you don't not want anything. You're kind of in some like low grade sense of acceptance or some sense of ease. And part of it is like to be aware of those, and to recognize and to acknowledge those, and to recognize that that feels good, and that that's actually probably what you're looking for.
Okay.
Most people, I think, especially people who practice, really what they're after is they want to have a meaningful life. They want to have contentment. They want to have ease. They want to have spaciousness. They don't necessarily want a Tesla or,
Mm-hmm.
they don't, they usually, people who have a contemplative leaning find that the things that the hedonic world offers them are things that they actually don't want.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
then they're left, well, then what do you want? If it's not material, it's non-material, we could say, or it's spiritual, or it's a sense of meaning, or a quality of being, something that's actually kind of hard to pin down. Like, it's
Sure.
really easy to pin down a Lexus. It's a car. You can go to the store, you can buy it, you can get payments, you can probably drive away with it today.
Right.
This other stuff is not so easy to pin down because it's not really a thing.
Right.
And so I think working with people is trying to help people go, well, what is it actually that you want? What is it that you're really after? And it's usually, this is where the greed, hatred, confusion becomes helpful, because it's usually what they want. It's not about something that they don't have that they want to get, or it's not about something that's going on that they want to get rid of. It's this other thing.
Have you ever encountered someone whose clinging is towards the really wanting this peace, these moments of nibbana? Have you ever worked with someone who maybe goes over that way strongly?
Well, yeah, that yes, definitely. I think that a lot of people find that that's what they want, but there can be, again, a greed for that even, or I think largely, I think in many ways, in the American Buddhist landscape, I think there can be a confusion about, because this word enlightenment that you'll almost never hear me use, I think that people think that there's some sort of Buddhist heaven or some kinds of nirvana. There's some mind state that's extraordinary. And I think that creates a problem, because then it becomes a kind of spiritual bypass where people think there's some golden magical state behind it all that they're going to get access to. And I think we don't really acknowledge that nibbana or mindfulness or equanimity or any of these ideas. They're very ordinary experiences, I think, that people are having all the time.
Oh, so it's that wanting that like super transcendental experience. It's that thinking that if a meditation is, I'm going to use good right now, even though that's not the right word, but context. If a meditation is good, then like something amazing happened to me while I was on the cushion, or I had some amazing aha, or I was transported someplace magical garden in my mind or something, huh?
Yeah. Well, I think, the Buddhist goal, or nirvana or nibbana, awakening, enlightenment, has gotten put on too high of a pedestal. And so I think that part of one of my big goals as a teacher and a practitioner is trying to bring it down to the ground where it belongs, and saying, no, actually, because I think what people do is they think that there's a liberation that is beyond conditions. Like we're in these aggregate conditions of the human experience. We have perception and feeling, and we have a pain body and a nervous system and emotions and dukkha and all this stuff. And we want to be above and beyond all that. So people can get into the easy delusion that there's some kind of way that we can meditate ourselves into some state or experience that's beyond the conditions of our humanness, which I think is a big trap. But what the Buddha is saying is, you can be liberated and you can be free within your conditions. So we're trying to be free within the conditions, not trying to get to some point beyond those conditions, which I think is where Buddhism gets to be too much in the tricky territory of religion.
As you say that, I think, well, isn't that kind of the point of the reason that he was a human and he went through a human death in front of everyone, and he went through?
Yeah, I would agree with all that. Yeah, I think that's so. What happened to that story?
Exactly.
I think as Buddhism, as the Dharma, let's say, traveled to different places and became different kinds of Buddhism, each Buddhism made the Buddha a little bit more special.
Yes.
To the point now, like in certain schools of Tibetan Buddhism, he's like this perfect, omniscient, like, they just kind of kept making him better and better and better and better and better. And maybe forgetting that, no, he was actually a person who lived in a time and a place, and lived within all the same conditions that we live in. And he found a freedom within those conditions that we can also have.
I see. And then I think, is that because, I don't know if we have the answer, but is that because we as people, when we see something obtainable but really difficult, we want to, like make this religious leader, he wasn't a religious leader at the time, right? He was just
he is kind of now.
You want to make them into like this amazing thing. And in that way, then if if the Buddha is an amazing person,
he's perfect,
or being, like not even a person, like a being, a godlike being.
Yeah, that's right.
I have a good excuse for not being able to achieve these things, don't I?
Well, that's a good point too.
Because I'm just Margaret. I'm just a human.
Yeah.
Like, I can't be doing that.
Right. Yeah. So he's become so perfect. He's become so impossible.
Yeah.
And also too, I think the striving for that actually, to me, has a strong stench of greed to it.
So what do you think that? Tell me more about that.
Well, I think that, it looks better, the idea that there's this perfection, enlightenment, no more suffering, all these things. That looks really good on the brochure, doesn't it?
It does.
The fact that life is really hard and you have to deal with it and you have to deal with the pain body. And yes, we're all going to get sick and we're all going to get old and we're all going to die. And that doesn't look good on the brochure. You know what I mean? That's not a really, really good marketing. So I think that just the way humans do things and the way things happen, it's no surprise that the teachings and the Buddha over time became more and more perfect, more and more impossible, less and less human, more and more godlike. I think that's a tendency of humans to do this kind of thing.
So you don't think the advertising should be, come sit with us, have lots of ugly cries, and then you'll feel better?
Yeah, right, exactly. Who's going to sign up for that program?
I don't know.
I mean, I'll sign up for it.
Yeah.
I'll sign up for it. I'll teach it. That's kind of my thing, is that, and I think it's more, I think at the end of the day, we have to come to terms with the limitations of our humanity.
Absolutely.
And who wants to do that? That's messy work.
Yes, it is. And that's kind of like one of the key words, even though, again, we don't always like that word, but it is work. It is doing.
It's total work.
It is doing the work. So what else would you tell, because you work with a lot of people and you do a lot of helpful teaching. And so I'm thinking you see a lot of common themes in our behaviors. And so what are some of the teachings you would give to us to help us with our clinging and attachment and aversion?
Well, here's the big one, the number one, survey says, numero uno, the biggest kind of challenge people have with meditation is everybody feels like they're doing it wrong.
Okay. So how do I get over that? Yesterday I thought I did it wrong because I couldn't concentrate and I didn't meditate as long as I wanted to.
Right. So then we have to look at, well, what does doing it right look like and what does doing it right mean? Most people doing it right. And I still do this. I sit in the morning for 30 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel calm. There's no pain in the body. I feel relaxed. I feel present. The bell rings. What do I say to myself? Ooh, that was a good one. Why was it good? Because it was pleasant. Maybe I just got lucky that morning.
Right.
Or I sit, like you say, my concentration's terrible. My mind's all over the place. I feel guilty about some stuff I said to my son yesterday, and the bell rings and I go, that was a shit one. that was a waste of time.
Right.
What was the difference between those two sits? Well, one of them was pleasant and I feel like that was good. And the other one was unpleasant and I feel like that was bad. And so the whole point of Dharma practice is to try to break this whole pleasure pain dichotomy from us in the first place. Mm-hmm. So part of it is like having to actually like play that out. Okay, well, what does doing it right even mean? And if you ask people, they can't even answer. They feel like they're doing it wrong, but they don't even know what that means. Yeah. Which I think is just kind of funny.
Okay, so I want to maybe language this tip a little bit into, don't be attached to how your meditation goes, just meditate.
There you go. There's that word again. That's a good use of it. Yeah, being attached to the experience being a certain way is dangerous.
And then that's how we get discouraged, and maybe we go away and we don't keep going, right? We
get discouraged, or we get caught up in the hymn. We get caught up in doubt. We think, oh, this doesn't work. We don't stick with it long enough to see the benefits. So that's a big one that I think people need to tackle right away. And so if people feel like they're doing it wrong, and that feels like there's a strong sense of that, then we need to drill down on that, like probably right away, and get that sorted out as quickly as possible, which could take as much as. Well, I wouldn't say as much, probably as little as 90 to 100 days. I think people can get that ironed out pretty good. The other thing that contributes to that, and why I'm a big advocate and almost prerequisite for Dharma practice, is that people do loving kindness or metta practice, kindness practice for themselves, at least half the time for a period of time. Because what contributes to that, I'm not doing it right, is a feeling of unkindness or judgment or not good enough, or there's an attitude towards oneself that kind of lingers below the surface that will contribute. So if I don't have a lot of kindness towards myself and I feel like I'm not meditating correctly, I'm probably not going to last very long on the cushion.
Right. It's that self-criticism, that inner voice.
Yeah. Not good enough, right. Not trying hard enough. So I think if you can address those are two big ones. And also too, it's like, metta is everywhere. It has been for a long time. But my experience was when people come into my program or I meet people and I ask them about their metta practice, most people say they don't have one. I
Okay.
very, very, very rarely do I encounter a practitioner who has a robust, regular practice of kindness for themselves. And
Okay.
so if you do those two things right out of the gate, I think in little as 90 or 100 days, you can really turn the table on that whole thing. So if there's a sense of kindness, a sense of ease, kindness towards myself, then the
Mhm.
whole doing it right or doing it wrong thing, that just kind of starts to fall away. And if we change the paradigm there, then you can go. I mean, if you can get over those two hurdles, you can really do all kinds of amazing things.
Awesome. And then that getting over those two hurdles will keep you on the path towards learning to release your suffering, right?
I mean, if you sit down and close your eyes and sort of like yourself a little bit,
Mhm.
wow.
Isn't that an amazing concept? Just that. And I'll say what's amazing to me about that concept is that I'm being repetitive when I say what's amazing about that concept is that it's amazing. In other words, that we live in a society that doesn't always teach us that that's the right way to
Oh
be.
no, that's not a value. That is not an American value. I don't think. I mean, maybe implicitly to some degree, but like the question is, I could ask you, when you sit down and close your eyes, do you enjoy the company that you keep in the privacy of your own mind? And
Mhm.
most people say not really.
Right. And that's why we have all these other distractions.
Yeah. So if you're having a hard time committing to a regular practice and sitting with some degree of diligence, we need to get that sorted out right away. Because if you do enjoy the company that you keep in the privacy of your own mind, then when you sit down, you're you're going to want to experience, you're going to desire sitting more because you find it to be an enjoyable experience to be with yourself in that kind of way.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I don't think it takes that long.
Probably not. Probably not. It's just the consistent doing. I mean, you would know because you see it you see it in yourself and you see it in those that you
I
work
mean,
with.
I think it's like 100. It's like 3 to 4 months. People can
Okay.
completely turn that around. Also, if you look at Richard Davidson's work, who's done a lot of work at the Center for Healthy Minds in Madison, Wisconsin,
Mhm.
neuroscience, mindfulness advocate, longtime practitioner, they've started to do some research on that, and they're showing that metta practices, the benefits come very, very quickly, and the intensity of sort of self-affliction comes down relatively quickly. So. Um, and I think it's a mindfulness practice. I don't even separate them out. It is a self kindness. Kindness is a mindfulness practice that I would argue in mindfulness culture is highly undervalued and highly underdeveloped and highly underacknowledged.
Right. Because, without going too far down a tangent on my side here, because we've stripped a lot of things away in order to sell mindfulness, make it more, palatable.
There's the greed again.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. You're right.
See, it shows up everywhere.
There you go. There you go. Okay. So we have the, sit in a non judgmental way. There's no good meditation. There's no bad meditation. There's just meditation. And we have lots of, loving kindness towards ourselves and, generally having a good metta practice. And is there something else you would want to add?
Well, I think they have to be balanced too. So what I would say is like when I work with people, my general, let's just say dosage, if we want to use that word, is I try to get, I think a healthy meditation practice would be like you sit 5 days a week
Mm-hmm.
and you sit for 30 minutes each time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you alternate mindfulness of breathing or mindfulness of the body, some kind of somatic based mindfulness practice. The mind wanders, you come back. The mind wanders, you come back. However you do that, is fine.
Uh-huh.
And you would alternate that with the phrases of, may I be at ease, may I be content, may I treat myself with kindness. And you just alternate those every other sit, which is really the doorway or the trailhead for a practice that I teach called Metta Vipassana, which is an integration of mindfulness and Metta practices. But I think so. I love when people get to the point where when they sit down in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're doing mindfulness of breathing or Metta for themselves, they get to the point where they can't tell one from the other. They've become so integrated.
I love that. So you just sit and then it just happens. You just
There's
do.
an attitude of kindness. There's a quality of presence in the body. There's an attitude of kindness. So you get to the point where, like, if I was to ask you to do one of those, you wouldn't even be able to do them separately anymore because they've become so integrated. Now, once that becomes an integrated practice, that's kind of the baseline of one's practice, then you can, to some degree, in many ways, you're sort of invincible.
Yes, I like that. I like that. And so now in this, you are sharing so much great information, and then I've asked questions, which maybe sometimes I took us, down a different path. So I just
That's
want
all
to
right.
circle back and check in with you. Was there anything you wanted to make sure that you got to share with us today?
Yeah, a little bit. I think a lot of it is to question some of the teachings that you hear. Like I think the big thing what I'm doing here this morning is I'm questioning this word attachment. Is
Yes.
this the right? Is this the right word? Is this the word we want to use? It's not. Where does it come from? And so, when there are certain things that don't feel right for us with Dharma practice or Buddhist language, to really dig into question and to trust that if it doesn't quite feel right for you, that not that you're wrong or you're not seeing it clearly, that maybe there's another way. Because the English language is so rich. So part of it, I think, is that you will hear the word attachment in a pejorative sense in the Buddhist world. There's no doubt about it, and I think that that's a little bit problematic. And I think that we really want to look at really attachment. Probably not the greatest thing in the world, but really it's the greed,
Okay. Okay.
and it's greed as a as really something that's unethical and that it's unhelpful, it's unskillful for you. It's like eating, it's eating, it's eating Doritos and drinking Dr. Pepper. It might be pleasant when you're doing it, but it's like not good for you. It's not good for other people.
Right.
And so trying to look at it more that way as something that you practice with. It's not, there's no, whether you believe, it's not what you know, it's what you know how to do. Do you know when there's greed in your mind? Do you know that? Are you aware? And are you able to work with it in a way? And that, now that, if you just did that, if you just woke up tomorrow and said, I'm just going to work on greed today,
Mm-hmm.
you would have to be very busy all day.
Probably, definitely so. Definitely so. Thank you so much. Anything else you would like to any parting? I'm going to call them parting words. Hopefully, we'll talk to you again in the future. But I mean, for
Yeah,
today.
and also I like to think that also too on the flip side of that, towards the tail end of the conversation, is to really try to take the goal of Dharma practice off the pedestal and really understand that we're really trying to cultivate is a very ordinary, very available, spacious quality of mind that's non-reactive, that's not driven by these greed, hatred, and confusion, and that it's
Mhm.
something that we all have access to. It's always here, always available. As they say, Nibbana, Nirvana is under your nose 24/7. It's not Star Wars Dharma. It's not a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It's literally right here all the time. So I think that we should all feel encouraged and inspired that this is all very doable.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I think that is so helpful. That reminder that like this is not something out of reach, that like you can only do this when you reach a certain point in your life, or you can only do this when you're a certain age or a certain level of whatever comfort. You can do this, and you can do this in your life now. I would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your suggestions, your own stories about attachment. So follow this link, I'm going to read it to you in a minute here, to leave me a 90-second message with your ideas and suggestions. You can go to https://www.speakpipe.com/death_Dhamma_podcast. I suppose you could also just use your favorite search engine to say SpeakPipe Death Dhamma Podcast. And there you can record an audio message for me. And be sure to come over to margaretmeloni.com. That's MargaretMeloni.com and join the community. You've been listening to the Death Dhamma Podcast with your host, Margaret Meloni. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmeloni.com, MargaretMeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.